Hello, America. Welcome to your Leo Nation. I am the chief, the happily retired chief, that is, Mark Garrett. With us today is the man behind the scenes and often now in front of the scenes, Anthony Jackson. Anthony, how are you out there in California?
Oh, doing as good as we can be. The situation over here, and the weather's not too bad though. It's a little cold, but politics wise, we'll just not comment on that.
Well,
We do have Nathan Hochman though now, so
listen, what do we believe in and support here? The rule of law. The
mhm.
rule of law here. And Nathan Hochman, the new Los Angeles County District Attorney, I am so happy for you. I'm so happy for everybody who resides in the county of Los Angeles. I know that you don't. You're just outside of Los Angeles County,
Yep,
but my God, listen, crime spreads. So people commit crimes in Los
exactly.
Angeles County. They go to other counties. So having Nathan Hochman, the DA, the largest population-wise county, certainly in California, is a good thing for all Californians, and I hope that it's a trend. Speaking of DAs, we know what happened just recently with the Daniel Penny case in New York. Daniel Penny was acquitted of all charges in the Jordan Neely death case, manslaughter case. And we'll talk a little bit about the DA. Some people will call Alvin Bragg the district attorney. I think that DA stands for dumbass, but that's just for me to say, I guess, my opinion in reference to Alvin Bragg. We'll talk a little bit about him near the end of the show. But there are so many aspects to this case, Anthony. Um, you're talking about investigation, law enforcement, politics, the social impact, judicial system, the crime situation in New York. There are so many aspects to this. But one I want to focus on, briefly today is the racial aspect, because this has been thrown in everyone's face almost from day one when this happened in 2023, I think May of 2023, is the racial aspect. Obviously, Daniel Penny, a white former Marine, Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old black man. And that's kind of all that so many people talked about for the longest time and continue to talk about today. Um, I certainly don't see racial influences here on the part of Daniel Penny. Um, and I want to get your take on this, but so many people do. We're going to show a couple of clips in relation to that and talk about that. But what's your thought on the racial aspect of this? Anthony, just briefly.
I think the narrative is being pushed artificially, and it was just a typical. I think people are taking advantage of the situation to draw just more uh, um, separation of, how do I say this? I think the media is driving this narrative, and people are buying it right now because I'm on the exact same page as you. Is that there is no clear indication that this was driven by some racial aspect. The guy was threatening people, period, and saying that he doesn't care if he lives or dies. And Daniel Penny was a hero. He put a stop to it. Um, he wasn't calling him any names. He wasn't saying anything like derogatory about his race or anything like that. People are looking at it through a certain shade of glasses that they're given, and that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think you sum it pretty well. Like you said, the media is still, also this way, the media is certainly running with this narrative that so many people are
Yes.
pushing, that um, either Daniel Penny's actions were racially motivated, or the jury's decision was racially motivated, racially biased. The entire judicial system is racially biased against blacks. Um, so with that said, I want you to play clip one, and we're going to watch a couple of people here who definitely think that the entire situation was based on and influenced by race. Go ahead and play clip one, Anthony.
We need some black vigilantes. Right. People want to jump up and choke us and kill us for being loud. How about we do the same when they attempt to oppress us? Right. I'm tired. I know you're looking for us to be like, oh, go and march. Go and march. No.
You know, that one clip we could talk about for hours. I really believe that because first of all, this man, again, these are people who are associated with BLM in New York. And he says that people want to jump on black people for being loud, This is such a disgrace. It's such a disgrace to um, characterize what happened on that subway as someone just being loud. That this is why Daniel Penny did what he did, restrained Jordan Neely, and kept him from harming people. Like you said, Anthony, who he had threatened, who Jordan Neely had threatened, hey, I don't care, go back to jail, someone's going to die today. See, that's not being loud. That is a threat. It's a threat that has the ability to be carried out. People are loud on the subway all the time, whether it's radios or whether it's just screaming, or you have people who are slightly deranged. People are loud on the subway all the time who actually don't make clear physical threats, including, hey, someone here is going to die today. That's what happened on that subway. And for this man to say that that's why Daniel Penny did what he did, it's a lie. It's a complete lie. The next aspect of this is when you say, well, maybe we should be vigilantes. Maybe we should commit acts of violence. By the way, again, Daniel Penny was not a vigilante. He didn't go outside of the law to go hunt someone down in response to a transgression that he felt happened. He was trying to prevent a violent act occurring against innocent people. That's not a vigilante, like you said, Anthony. That's a hero. And I certainly believe, and there's good reason to believe, based on Jordan Neely's history, that he probably did prevent at least one person or multiple people in that subway from being injured by Jordan Neely. Now, for this man, I think his last name is Newsom. I think the next person we're going to hear from is also Newsom. I guess I don't know if they're spouses. I don't know if they're siblings, whatever it is. But that we should go out and black people should become vigilantes. So this is an incitement. This is telling people, hey, the right way to behave now is to commit acts of violence. That's the way I take it from here. I don't think this does anybody good. I'm almost being tongue in cheek here. This is dangerous speak, is the truth. Speech. This is dangerous speech when you're telling people, well, maybe black people should now be vigilantes like this guy was. And like I said, he was not a vigilante. This guy was a hero who actually prevented something from happening almost certainly. So your take on that with that short clip from this guy about what he said, that's my 2 cents. Anthony, what do you think?
You summed it up really well. I think this is a clear example. The whole speech, but these specific parts, is a clear example as to why BLM is worse than the KKK. It seems like with the KKK, it operates very silently. We don't even see it, and everybody disavows it. BLM is out in the open talking about, hey, we should go choke white people. Like, in what world is that okay? Right? It's totally it's a travesty that we're even letting this go and be like, oh yeah, like I don't know. I think that it's getting to a point where the flames are so stoked from outside sources, and people are just going with the flow with it, and it's pure hatred, and we can clearly see it coming out of their mouth. It's not about anything else. It's just pure hatred and racism.
Well, Anthony, I think it's a great point. It's a great point when a person says that based on skin color,
Yeah,
you should engage in this type of behavior. In other words, well, maybe we should be vigilantes and we should choke. I don't know if he actually used the word white people. He said people, but based on everything else he says, so I think we can pretty much kind of figure out what he's talking about here. It's
exactly.
absolutely racially motivated. It's racism. It's racism really in the flesh when you say this. When you want someone or expect someone to engage in a certain behavior based on their race, that's racism. Yet this guy says that the judicial system and that white America, he goes on to say, well, not all white people are bad, but, and there's a but there. Can you imagine that if a white person said, well, not all black people are bad, but can you imagine? Can you imagine the blowback? And by the way, rightly so, if we heard a white person say that. But this person says that not all white people are bad, but, or not all white people are racist, but I think he said that, whatever, paraphrasing. And but he uses that qualifier before he goes and explain, X, Y, Z. So moving right along, I said this next lady here, in it's some ways related to him. I want you to hear her clip. I'll play clip 2, Anthony.
And if you look on social media, if you look at the hatred spewed across against us, against black people, against a man who was sick, because when there's a crisis of drugs in America, I'm sorry, it's only a crisis when it's a white person, an opioid crisis. Jordan was labeled a drug addict and labeled a crackhead.
So this is interesting here. She talks about, and there's so much more. We kept it short. She's talking about that the drug crisis is only a crisis for white people. It's only a crisis. It's only labeled a crisis when it affects the white population. I think I summarized what she said pretty well there. I mean, pretty fairly. But if you're a black person, then you're a crackhead or you're an addict, things like this. Anthony, can you go out on a limb right now? When you think about the word crackhead, when you think about that, like in the public sphere, can you identify who do you think the world's most famous crackhead today is?
You know what? There's an artist that comes to mind. He's a controversial artist. I think you know of him. HB.
HB. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a crazy guy. Very well known. Was recently pardoned, by the way. Controversial take on the pardon. A lot of people felt that he shouldn't have been, or he should have been. It's kind of split.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter Biden.
Hunter
right?
Biden.
He's
Biden.
the most famous. You're right. He's the most.
It's 100%. It's an easy question, and the reason it's easy
what's
because
his skin color.
It's the skin color is as white as this piece of paper right here, and the reason I bring him up is because she said, those are her words, that if you're a black person, you're a crackhead. If you are a white person, you're an addict and you're a victim, of this crisis, right? The funny thing about this, if I just said, hey, who do you know right now in the world, who's a victim of the opioid crisis or, addicted to drugs? There are a lot of people. But when you actually use the term crackhead, people think about Hunter Biden, because white and black America and everybody in between has referred to him as a crackhead. So this whole thing about treating black people differently than white people when it comes to this horrible epidemic of drug abuse and drug addiction in this country is an absolute lie. It's an absolute lie. It's another attempt to skew the narrative in favor of a group or individuals based on skin color. It's a lie. This epidemic affects everybody, and people are treated the same. Now, by the way, when I say that, I'm 61 years old. I remember when, going back into the late 80s, early 90s, maybe up to mid 90s, with the crack really epidemic in in South Central Los Angeles and different metropolitan areas across the country. And I do think that crack was treated differently under the law, it certainly was, than say powder cocaine. In other words, people that are pretty much in the same substance in Compton, California, were treated differently than people who lived in Bel Air who were snorting powder cocaine. I absolutely do. Now, I said a long time ago, either on this show or maybe Bill Bodner's show, I said the reason for that is because of the specific, overt, clear, and terrifying violence that was associated with the crack cocaine trade, that you had innumerable numbers of black people who were either being killed directly from crack cocaine or its effects, or through the violence associated with it. Now, again, rightly or wrongly, we know there's violence associated with powder cocaine as well, in that trade. What I'm saying is, what is immediately visible when you're talking about gang activity, gang on gang crime. I think that's one of the reasons that crack cocaine carried these heavier prison terms and penalties than the use of powder cocaine was. Again, I don't think that was fair, but I think that it wasn't based on race. It was based on the actions associated with the use of crack cocaine, the violent crime that was overtly clear with the trade of crack cocaine. So this whole thing about, but nowadays in 2024, back then 2023, sorry, I don't think it applies anymore. She knows it doesn't apply anymore. And this is just another example of, well, let's make excuses for our side. Let's make excuses for our side, and let's make those excuses based on race, based on the hatred of white people for black people. That's my take on that thing with the drug use. And this is so important, Anthony, because we know that, we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, that if there had been proper support, if there had been proper penalties that had been levied out against Jordan Neely earlier, he most likely would not have found himself on that subway that day. Your thoughts?
I agree. I think for some reason, and it sucks. It sucks real bad that there's people out there that get to speak for all black people, essentially. Perception over reality, right? You have these people talking in front of the news, and we're reacting to it right now. And I know a lot of black people don't feel that way, but you have these spokesmen that, instead of trying to elevate the culture and say, hey, we need to do better, there's this and this and that going on, they're spewing the absolute most hatred. Part of it is the racial division, and it's just a really low IQ, low take on what happened there, and it's not intellectually honest with what happened. You have a guy that's threatening people regardless of skin color, saying all this crazy stuff that someone's going to die today, I don't care if I go back to jail. And then you have somebody who's a hero there that's willing to take action to save lives and risk himself, his own life. He doesn't know what could happen to himself. He put himself aside and seen all the women on the train. If there was children, I'm not too sure. And
Yeah, there
said,
were.
you know what? Okay, there were even just one child. I mean, I'd like to think that I myself would do that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That's how I look at it. And then I see people talking about him, slandering his name, saying that there was an injustice,
Mhm.
instead of saying, hey, there's an issue. It doesn't even have to be with the black population or anything like that. It's more so there's an issue, there's a crisis happening in New York. It's happening in LA. It's happening everywhere in America. And we need to do something about it. And instead of going that route and at least
Right.
trying to be a positive and trying to look for a solution, it's all spewing hate. And either it's by design or it's straight brainwashing that, you know, we got to really step out of. That's just my opinion on it, and I think it's really sad situation. And of course, we don't going back to Floyd, nobody wants to see him to die
Right.
or anything like that. Nobody wants that. Nobody hates him. And a lot of people think that people who are pro Penny or saying that um, you know, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of of George Floyd, but a lot of people think that people hate him, specifically white people. And that's in their own ecosystem, their own perception. And I don't know how to break out of that because you can't even just say, oh, I don't hate that guy. They don't believe you.
Yeah.
They're in a certain mode where they're like us versus them type of thing. And I don't know how to break out of that because it's very just black and white looking at things, and you get something like this where these people are speaking in front of the news saying that stuff. And it's I don't know what the solution is, but that's really the issue right there, is that these people are just not intellectually honest and going, hey, this guy had some mental issues, he was threatening people, he was a real danger. You could see other videos of him reacting to people, threatening them, pushing them, uh trying to pick fights. He was not in a good place, and it's not because he was black. It was because he had drug issues. He had, um, and then that perpetuates this domino effect, and that's just the truth. And a lot of people are listening to me saying, "Yeah, we know." Well, a lot of people don't believe that.
Mhm.
They think Daniel Penny hates this guy because he looked at him and said, "Oh, that's a black man there, getting loud. I'm gonna choke him out and kill him." I mean,
You know,
in
Anthony,
what world does
it's
that sound correct? You
rational.
know? Yeah.
It when you say that, it's so important because the implication is that had Jordan Neely been white, Daniel Penny would have sat there and ignored his behavior. Oh, I don't care if I don't care if you
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
someone's going to die today. I'm just going to sit here and watch you assault that lady or injure that child. I'm just going to go ahead and ignore it because you're white, so I'm going to ignore it.
Right.
That's what the people that we just watched are in implying,
Mm-hmm.
that everything, not only, by the way, and again, we're focusing on, primarily today the racial aspect, but not only the incident itself, but the entire judicial system, including this trial, were all influenced heavily by race. So starting with Daniel Penny, and then the defense attorneys and the jurors. By the way, I know that there were 9 white jurors. I guess that, again, that implies that there are 3 minorities. I don't even know the racial makeup of those 3 non-white jurors, but so you have to have 3 white jurors that voted to acquit him as well. So I guess I don't know what you call them. I guess they're sellouts like me. I don't know what that means, but this reminds me. I hadn't thought about this in preparation for the show today, but I remember about a little over 20 years ago, I was a California Highway Patrol officer at the time. I was off duty, and I was actually riding a train, a commuter train in Southern California, and someone got loud on the train, got really loud, and then start making threats. And I'm sitting there because I'm off duty. I'm a cop. I'm sitting there just trying to get to my destination. And I'm thinking, oh, crap, please just sit your ass down. Just sit down, shut up, so I don't have to either ignore this, which I think is the immoral thing to do, or get involved. And for me, being a police officer, when you get involved in an enforcement contact off duty, In other words, it certainly can be done, but there can be ramifications because of identifying yourself as a peace officer. Now you've attached yourself to the department for which you work. And so now all the policies and procedures kick in. So a lot of things going through my mind. So that's what I'm saying. Please just sit down, because I am not going to let this go to the point where someone gets injured. But I certainly don't want to get involved because I actually am a police officer. Off duty. If I were on duty in uniform, it'd be a whole different story. Easy decision. Right. And this guy keeps ramping it up. And by the way, he's drunk, obviously drunk, but getting to the point now where it's clear, violent, threatening language. A white guy. And if I remember correctly, almost everybody on that coach where I was sitting were white people. So what eventually happened? I stood up and I said, dude, sit down. Just please be quiet. Get off the next stop or just be quiet. The FU came out from him, a threat towards me. And then I thought, okay, maybe I'll take it to the next level. I did what I did not want to do. I identified myself as a police officer. At that point, now I'm locked in. Now I'm on the clock, so to speak. Everything I do, I have to answer to now to the department. And I said, I'm a police officer. I'm off duty. Don't do this. And by the way, I was armed. And I'm wondering, by the way, where's the conductor? Where's train security? There's nobody there. I'm sure the people in New York are used to this, not having that immediate help. And I think someone's hitting the button, pulling the cord, whatever it is. And now I get into a physical altercation with this guy. I take him to the ground and I put him in a control hold, and he's struggling. But I had him in a pretty good control hold. And a couple of minutes later, conductor gets there and blah, blah, blah. They stop the train. The sheriff's department gets on the next stop and we handcuff him and off he goes. And sure enough, I had to write up a report for the highway patrol, what I did, blah, 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 because I identified myself as a CHP officer. My point is this. That guy was white. I'm black. The would-be victims on the train, besides myself, certainly there were lots of white people. There might have been minorities. I just can't remember the makeup. But the point is, it didn't matter to me. All that mattered to me was his behavior, were the threats that he was making. So, I did what I had to do in the situation. I had totally forgotten about that until just 3 minutes ago. But again, Daniel Penny, according to his detractors, only engaged in the behavior he did because of the skin color of Jordan Neely. So,
I was
Anthony,
going to say, Mark,
go ahead.
That's a really weird explanation to explain why you hate white people.
Yes. I just wanted to get that out there and be transparent, almost as transparent as your skin. So, it is what it is. But
that's a crazy story. That's literally the same situation.
Yeah,
it just didn't end up as bad as him dying. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you shared that. I mean, how many situations like that arise? And here's also, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but really the ramifications of this. Imagine that I'm sitting there on the train in New York and something happens, and I'm thinking about this Daniel Penny case and how his life is, he's got I don't know how his life is. I'm sure that there's a lot of ramifications that happen with his work, his ability to do almost anything. Imagine him going to the grocery store, or how can he live a normal, somewhat normal life now, being framed as a racist killer, right? I hope that this verdict, him getting off, would have some positive ripple effects, but I'm just curious to see how it affects people in the long run as far as like taking action, heroic action and stuff like that. I really I hope that people don't second guess things. I mean, like, your concern was more so your job and like policy wise, and then if it was flipped roles, it'd be, hey, am I going to be you know am I going to take negative feedback from doing this, which I know is right. And I just find it interesting, and I hope that it doesn't, but it looks like logic tells me that that's how it will end up, which is really sad. And I hope that we don't see something happen and people stand by and go, hey, I just didn't want to be, pennied. So,
Yeah, it's a great term. I'm sure it'll become part of the vernacular here in the near future. But you raised some good
yeah.
points there, Anthony. Look, people are saying, well, now that Penny was acquitted, this won't put a damper on the behavior of would-be good Samaritans, and they'll still step up, and hoping men will step up and protect people around them. I don't know that the acquittal is going to encourage people to engage in moral, ethical self-defense and defense of others. I don't know. The reason is because even though he was acquitted, this has been almost a year and a half, about a year and a half, that he's been going through this entire process, the incident, the investigation, the indictment, the trial. And by the way, now the father of Jordan Neely has sued him. I mean, so the whole civil process now has to play out. I certainly would understand.
Where was he when his son was going through it?
Nobody knows. It's probably, again, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a social worker, but the idea that his upbringing. I mean, his mom was murdered, I think, in 2000 and I think it was 2007 that Jordan Neely's mom was murdered. I don't know where his father was or has been in the interim, but the idea that these things didn't play into the clear mental illness this guy suffers from, I think it's just it's kind of juvenile. I think it's naive to believe these things didn't play a role. But now the father wants to step in, and he wants to make sure that he's taken care of, and because he's his biological father. So we have it. But
Can I ask you one thing
yeah,
before we move on? Penny, do you think that if he knew that he could probably be facing charges, do you think he would have still taken action?
it's a really good question. And of course, none of us know the answer. I
Hmm.
probably even Daniel Penny, um, probably in retrospect, doesn't know what he would have done. In other words, if he had a crystal ball, if he knew for sure that this was his future, maybe he would have sat back and said, you know what, I'm going to roll the dice and hopefully the guy doesn't kill anybody. And I'm not going to do anything unless he actually attacks me. Again, these are all possibilities. We do not know. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a great question to contemplate, Anthony. This is where I was getting at. It's like people watching this whole process. And by the way, the I don't know how much money he owes his lawyers for
Yeah.
this year and a half defense process. So these are all life changing events, starting with the event on the subway that
Right.
now Daniel Penny is dealing with. So would anybody want to go through this in exchange for rolling the dice and hoping this guy doesn't hurt somebody, just hoping this guy doesn't hurt me? I don't know. I mean, I would certainly hope that if, God forbid, tomorrow I find myself in that situation, that I would do what I think is the right thing to do, regardless of the repercussions. But
That's what
you
I'm
know,
thinking.
we don't know until we are put in those situations. None of us do. None of us know
Mhm.
exactly what we're going to do. I made it clear that even 20 something years ago when I was on that train, that I was sitting there in my mind thinking about, okay, if I do X, then Y is going to happen, vice versa, um, because I had time to contemplate the consequences. It wasn't a split decision; didn't have to be. Um, and so I had time to contemplate it. And then I went ahead and made what I think still now was the right decision, the right thing to do. And that was to take this guy into custody, into physical custody, and then wait for backup from the uniformed law enforcement. But I think, let's put it this way. I think for a lot of people, Anthony, this is going to put a damper on their willingness to engage anybody under similar circumstances. I don't see how it can't. I don't see how it can't. Um,
Yeah.
if you watch the news, if you have family at home, you want to protect your family financially, socially speaking, publicly speaking. I can't see how it doesn't have an impact when it comes to people making these decisions. But I want to move on to the kind of the final aspect of the racial aspect of this. People are talking about how the system is so slanted, these people specifically that we just watched the clips of, but not just them. There's so much of this that the system is slanted against blacks. And Alvin Bragg, the DA, totally what I think that stands for, it should stand for in reference to Alvin Bragg. He's really notorious for political persecutions and prosecutions, and we all know what I'm talking about. But in addition to that, I think it's pretty clear that he has a racial bias. That's my opinion when it comes to prosecutions. And to that point, I want you to play this last clip, Anthony. And this goes, before you play it, just set up. This goes back to the New York bodega incident some time ago. I think it was in 2022, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And where, is that right, Anthony? I think 2022.
I think so.
And
2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. So this, I think he was an employee. I don't think he was the owner, but whatever it is, the man working at this bodega has an incident. He defends himself. And then Bragg does what he does. And we'll watch the clip, and then we'll talk about this, and we'll finish up the segment for the day. Go ahead and play the clip from here all the way to about a minute and 12 seconds, I think, Anthony. Go ahead.
Okay.
Bodega worker Jose Alba is home tonight after spending 6 days on Rikers Island. He hid his face and had nothing to say about his self-defense case. His saga started Friday night while at work at the Blue Moon Bodega in Hamilton Heights. This woman seen on surveillance video getting mad after she's denied a bag of chips because her EBT card is not working. Her boyfriend comes in, confronting Alba behind the register, pushing the 61-year-old. Alba's attorney says the video speaks for itself, and Alba stabbed 37-year-old Austin Simon in self-defense, resulting in his death. Police arrested Alba, charging him with murder, but the mayor is on Alba's side.
My heart goes out for that hard-working, honest New Yorker that was doing his job in his place of business, where a person came in and went behind the counter and attacked him. My heart goes out to that employee who was in the store doing his job. And so I am hoping that we take all of that into consideration.
After Alba's cash bond was set at a hefty $500,000.
So I know that this has been talked about for the longest time, but you know, many people out there really may have forgotten about that and how this relates to the Penny case. First of all, it's the same DA. It's Alvin Bragg. It's Alvin Bragg who went after Penny after the cops investigated this and said, hey, there's no crime here. Bragg convenes a grand jury. Grand jury comes back, indicts them, so forth and so on. Here we are. And when you juxtapose that to a couple of years ago, about a year before the Penny incident with this bodega incident, we played the video there for a reason. So people can get actually a physical sense of what Mr. Alba, the employee there at that bodega, was going through. 61 years old, by the way, same age as me, but he's physically confronted by this young perpetrator who walks into a space behind the counter, behind the counter there, protected area, and threatens Mr. Alba. And Mr. Alba simply defends himself. He defends himself. Now, murder, of course, it requires, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I was a cop for a lot of years. Murder requires intent. There has to be intent to take a life in order to be charged with murder. If Mr. Alba had followed these guys outside, the guy and the gal, and shot him in the back, followed him out, and turned around and slashed him with this knife and killed him. Maybe there's an argument there. Maybe there's an argument for murder. He stood his ground after being physically threatened and actually assaulted because this guy, Simon, the suspect, or this guy, put hands on. And Mr. Alba is simply defending himself with whatever weapon he had, a small knife, and sure enough, hit the right spot, and this guy bled out. But Bragg initially supported the charge of murder. This man spent 6 days in Rikers Island lockup as a murder suspect. By the way, $500,000 bond that the DA, by the way, can lobby the court to reduce the bond, to eliminate the bond, but not Bragg. Eventually, the judge did reduce it, and eventually the charges were dismissed. But one of the reasons, Anthony, that the charges were dismissed was, I think, for strictly political reasons. I said one of the reasons, I said strictly. I say primarily for political reasons because Mayor Adams, who I'm not the biggest fan of, I've kind of like moved into his corner a little bit here. But this is one of the things he did 2 years ago. I said, you know what? Good for you, Eric Adams. As a black man, as a black mayor, and as a former cop in NYPD, he stood up and said, this is BS. This poor guy is just defending himself. He did not initiate anything. And now he's in Rikers Island for murder. There was a lot of pressure on Bragg, and eventually Bragg gave in and dropped the charges. But when you look at the racial makeup here, you had a black criminal, and that's what this guy was. Because, by the way, Jordan Neely had a criminal record, and you had a non-white, I guess, but Alba, Hispanic, I believe, victim. So here you have someone who, let's put it this way, if that were a black employee and a white man had come in and threatened and engaged in the same behavior that Simon did, would Bragg have charged him with murder? I'm just asking the question, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just asking the question. What do you think? Obviously, no one knows for sure. There's no way to factually prove what Bragg would have done. But just think about this. Would he have charged him? What do you think would have happened? I think not. I think that because the person who died, I almost said victim, he wasn't the victim. He died as a result of his own actions, as far as I'm concerned. But had this person, had this perpetrator, had he been white and had the employee been black, I think that we would have seen something totally different here. Totally different. Because I believe it's the way that Bragg operates. I believe that he sees things through, race color lenses. What do you think, Anthony?
No, I think so too. We can all make the assumption here on, if the roles were the races were reversed, right? I have a question though. So we have Alvin Bragg as DA. We have here in California, thankfully not anymore, but for LA County was George Gascon. And of course, like you said earlier, the crime spreads everywhere. So even though I'm in a different county, we still see the effects, the ripple effects on what he allows and what he chooses to take on and all that stuff, right? So what I'm trying to ask is, how does the DA alter the judicial system, like how we're seeing right here, how we see people rob stores at gunpoint, they get caught, they get bailed out same day. Then you have heroes like Penny go in, choke a guy, possibly stopping him from harming people or causing God knows what to random people, and or even kill somebody in the future. That's looked like, being honest, that's what it kind of looked like his path was going down. How does Bragg, being in that position, how does he dictate these things that are going on? I'm just curious from a civilian standpoint.
Yeah, it's really a great and important question, Anthony, because this is where the entire concept of blind justice comes into play. This is the way it's supposed to be. Um, DAs have obviously a lot of power when it comes to charging or not charging, or um, on which specific charges to move on. I dealt with it a lot. I dealt with it a lot. You think you have a great case. You have a great case and you submit it to the DA's office. And it may not be the DA, the head DA, but you have these assistant DAs, and they'll look at the case and say, yeah, you know what, Officer Garrett, Sergeant Garrett, Lieutenant Garrett, Chief Garrett, whatever it is, you know, we understand where you're coming from, but we just don't think there's enough here, blah, 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 whatever. You go, what? Didn't you go to law school? I mean, it's like, look at I got the elements of the crime here and blah, 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 whatever. But they'll have their reasons to why they don't think it's a strong case. Or they'll say, hey, we need more information. You need to go back and reinvestigate, and we need to talk to that witness, talk to this person over here, blah, blah, whatever. But a lot of times it's called a declination. They decline to file when you think you have a good case. Now, again, that happens all the time. And I think even when you disagree with an assistant DA or the DA, him or herself, that the disagreements are based on legitimate professional differences. It's not a personal thing, and it's not based on whatever, race or ethnicity, things like this. It's just, okay, here's my interpretation of the law. Here's my interpretation of really what's an element of the crime and blah, blah, whatever. And you agree to disagree. But I think what we've certainly seen with George Gascon, before he was booted out with, 70% of people in LA County voting against him, and for Nathan Hochman, thank God. I think that we saw, and I'll say not so much on race with George Gascon. I try to be objective, try to be fair about this, but I think what you saw with George Gascon, there was certainly a bias when it came to people who were in the criminal penal system. In other words, he saw that population, as victims, and that incarceration wasn't the way to go. That we need to engage in decarceration. We need to engage in reimagining. We need to engage in all of these loony ideas. So he was biased in a sense, and as it relates to what your incarceration or your criminal history status was. He thought the system was rigged and he had to come fix it. Now, I think that it's much more complicated than that. But I do believe that that's how he saw it, that he did work outside of elements of the crime. What you actually are accused of doing, did you actually do it? What's the just punishment here? He worked outside of that. But from what I can see, it wasn't based primarily, or maybe not even at all, on race. I don't believe that to be the case with Bragg. Bragg does both, in my humble opinion. That he does look at things through a political lens. And again, we won't get into the case we all know I'm talking about, because he said he was going to indict somebody. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to get so-and-so. He ran on that, right?
Right.
But he also sees things based through the lens of race. There's no doubt about it, in my opinion. That is my opinion. And again, going back to what I said earlier, that DAs have a very, very powerful lever at their hands to decide on whatever rationale, who to charge and who not to charge, or how to charge an individual, which, by the way, did come into play in this case because of the more serious charge and the lesser charge, and how the judge and how Bragg went about that, which is a story for a different podcast, and we'll need to talk about that in the future. So that's when these elected officials, and most DAs, not all, but most DAs are elected officials across the country. They have this power, Anthony. They have the power to make these calls. This is why Gascon was booted out, because he had made too many of these incredibly insane calls over the years that literally cost people their lives. Literally. We've had the spouse of one of those officers whose life was taken because of Gascon's decision to let a criminal back out in the street who should have still been in prison the day that he killed her husband. They got rid of him. I'm hoping the same thing's going to happen with Bragg the next election because of things like this and other cases we've talked about. But to answer your question, they have the authority. And if people don't like what they're doing with that authority long enough, they can boot them out of office. Mm-hmm. So want to finish up with this. We showed that video, and I think, again, if that perpetrator, if the guy who'd walked behind that counter had been white and the employee had been black, I doubt seriously that Bragg would have indicted that employee for murder. And I believe that it would have happened strictly, not happened strictly on race. But as we finish up here, this is important because the people we listened to earlier, those clips, Anthony, talked about the system's rigged. If you watch the entire thing, we didn't show some of those clips, but the entire judicial system, it's racist, it's slanted against blacks and things like this. But let me talk a little bit about the system that totally failed Jordan Neely. And this is from New York Post from May of 2023. This is right after the incident with Penny and Jordan Neely. Jordan Neely, he was reportedly listed, and he was at the time, it was reportedly, it's confirmed, he was listed on a city roster of people on the streets who desperately need help, referred to as the top 50 list. The internal catalog held by the city's Department of Homeless Services details which people are cycling in and out of homeless shelters and mental health treatment centers, or source told the Post on Monday. This man has been in and out, not only of jails and prisons over the years, but certainly more often with mental facilities. It's unclear if the list actually makes a difference in stopping the cycle of treatment, arrest, and homelessness. So this is a system that was aware that it was their system who put him on the list of one of the 50 most dangerous homeless people in the city. They knew he was a danger to himself and a danger to others. They had him in and out of the system, but there was either an inability or an unwillingness to commit this person to a psychiatric treatment center, a psych ward, against his will. That's what should have happened. You can put yourself in for 72 hours, say, I need help, blah, 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 whatever, and then you can leave. But once a certain threshold is reached, these arrests, these threats, the behavior that indicates you're a threat to yourself or others. I'm using that phrase because in California, that's what it's called 5150 hold. That's a phrase that we have to articulate. Hey, this person is a threat to themselves or others. You can actually hold people until a mental health care professional deems they are safe to go back into society. They didn't do that with the services that are available in the city and state of New York. They didn't, and he was in and out, again, to the point that they themselves put him on this most dangerous list. Now, if they'd held him against his will and over months or years try to get him psychiatric and emotional help that he clearly needed, or if he had been held in prison for some of the offenses I'll talk to you in a minute, longer than he was, maybe he would still be alive today. Did they let him out based on ethnicity or skin color or race? I don't know. doubt it. I think the whole system is just a mess where you have people going in and out, that is overworked, that it's probably bloated, it's probably inefficient, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Get this, Anthony, and everyone listening. He had a plethora of run-ins with the cops, and his frequent outburst of random violence led to at least one lengthy stay in jail. And it says jail, which means less than a year, at least in California, I'm familiar with. Anything more than a year's prison. Neely randomly punched Ann Mitchelltree in June of 2021, so about a year before the subway incident, inside the SK Deli Market on 2nd Avenue in the East Village, which left the 65-year-old woman with swelling and substantial pain. By the way, if Daniel Penny had seen him punch a 65-year-old woman on the train, should he have still just sat back and done nothing? Should he not have put him in the so-called chokehold and just said, "Hey, all he did was punch her. I'm going to sit back and just observe"? Should the next person just observe, or is that a threshold at which a good person will take action regardless of any racial implications whatsoever? It's just a question that we should all ask ourselves. And we'll never know. We'll never know if Daniel Penny prevented another 65-year-old or anybody else from being injured on that train. We'll never know if he had prevented it. He probably did. A few months later, Jordan Neely, belted a 67-year-old woman in the East Village, police sources said. The November attack knocked the woman over and left her with a broken nose, fractured orbital bone, and bruising, swelling, and substantial pain, according to charging documents. The assault landed Neely in Rikers Island for more than a year. In total, he had more than 40 arrests on his long rap sheet and about 43 calls for an aided case, which means someone is sick, injured, or mentally ill, sources say. This guy, and by the way, these are the cases that we know of. These are the assault and battery cases that he was arrested for, that were attributed to him. There are probably other cases out there, by the way, with other homeless people. Maybe he's severely injured and never reported a crime. These are the ones that we know about. And when I say we as in society, and certainly we as in the people in New York, the officials, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's prosecutors, and I think probably more importantly in this case, the mental health care system in New York, we're all aware of. And somehow this person at 30 years old, who had more than 40 run-ins with the law, which is astronomical, was allowed to stay on the street. And it ended the way we all know it ended today. Anthony, I'm going to give you the last word, and we're going to ask our audience their opinion on some of these things before we leave. So you go ahead and take it over, buddy.
Yeah. So I've seen people saying, they're asking the question, should Neely have been killed because he was mentally unstable? Which is a terrible question, right?
Terrible, yes.
But I see that as people are defending him, or defending the whole situation, saying that there was an injustice and that he didn't deserve to die because he was mentally ill. And my answer to that is, crazy people kill people. Crazy people hurt people. Mentally ill people cause harm to themselves or to others. No sane people do that. That's your answer. The answer is in the question itself. Did he deserve to get killed or die? No one deserves that, right? We can argue if he deserved it or not. No, he didn't deserve it. It's a sad situation, but the result of him being a violent 5150, that's just what happens. That's what we see it all over, white, black, any race. There's if you watch any body cams of people getting shot and killed, which is really sad, doesn't matter what the situation is, anybody dying, right? They are not mentally there. They're mentally ill. There's a reason why they're charging police with knives or shooting at them or taking babies as hostages, or you name it, the worst things, right? Did they deserve to die because they're mentally ill? No, it's the actions that they are taking, which, you could argue the state enabled it, or the family members or whoever enabled it, because they didn't reach out and get them help that they were not they at some point. It's not the volunteering of the help, they need to be held and helped. Same with Neely. He was able to get out in and out of these places and cause harm to others, and that's really the answer right there. And that's just, I wanted to bring that up because I see that argument going on right now on X, and everybody's talking about it. Did Penny know his history of violence or his criminal rap sheet? No, that's all irrelevant, because the criminal rap sheet and his mental illness led to that situation of him acting crazy and saying those things and threatening people, which resulted in his death. That's just the truth of it. That's all I got to say about it.
Well said, my friend. I could not agree more. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to hear from you. We want to ask you, do you believe the actions that Daniel Penny took were based in any way, shape, or form on the race of Jordan Neely? And let me ask you a question, another question we'll love to hear the answer on. Given the same situation, the same circumstances, would you take action to prevent the potential violent acts of a person in the same mindset as Jordan Neely? What would you do? See, that's the question we should all ask ourselves. We know how it ended up. The jury said that Daniel Penny was not guilty of the charges. You can disagree or agree with that. But the question is, what would you do if you were sitting in the same seat as Daniel Penny was on that train in 2023? And again, do you believe his actions were in any way at all motivated by race? We would love to hear from you. Shoot it out to us. I'll get back to as many people as I can. And if you like what you're hearing, hit the subscribe button. Just hit the subscribe button. It's free. It's all you got to do. It helps us to get the word out. And by the way, it helps us to be able to communicate with you guys and listen to you, what you say, even faster. So help us to help you and help everybody else out there. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Anthony Jackson, God bless you. Thanks a lot. Stay safe out there in California. It'll be a little easier with the county next to you under supervision of a much, much better DA than we've had the last 4 years.